Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Electric Vehicles for the Less Well-Informed. I hope you can all hear me, so I'm just going to ask you to raise your hands. Should be a little button near the bottom just to confirm that you can hear me, so you can, which is great. So there's also a question and answers box, so if you'd like to click on that and ask any questions, we probably won't take any questions during the presentation, but we'll do them at the end. So by all means, ask questions. And I'm being helped by Simon Hobbs, who's on the Q&A. So I'm sure he can hear me. Simon, are you there?
I am. Looking forward to this.
Great. So Simon's with us. So we'll get into it. And hopefully if I push a button, no. There we go, right. We're off. So this is a horse and cart and was probably one of the first greener vehicles on the road. And in 1937, the first, you could argue, electric vehicle hit the road, which was a milk float. And a milk float three-wheeler. When I was a kid growing up in the very late 70s, early 80s, I really remember it being a lot like this. So that'll probably look quite familiar to a lot of you. And today we have a company called Milk and More. Now they are still doing milk deliveries and recently committed to going down the electric route. And they've got over 500 Milk and More vehicles on the road delivering. So that's what it looks like, sort of history of EV vehicles on the road, really. So we're going to just touch on some basics for you guys. This webinar really is about an introduction to EV for people who perhaps know nothing at all, and then maybe for some people who have got a bit of knowledge and would like to learn a bit more, and then perhaps touching on some of the sort of major issues that we might have with EV moving forward. So to charge an electric vehicle really is to charge the battery, which is your fuel tank in a modern car. And the size of the battery is measured in kilowatts. And typically charging at home is going to cost you from around £2.30 to £6.80, depending on the battery size for a full charge. And that's going to be at a speed of around 3 kilowatts to 7 kilowatts, depending on the size of the battery. And it's going to take around 8 to 12 hours. And that's from 0%. Now, an equivalent charge in a public place is going to cost you in the region of £12.80 to £17.90 for a full charge. So you can see there's quite a difference between charging at home and in a public place. Now, there's a company called InstaVolt. I'm mentioning them because they were one of the first ones to take advantage of funding. And they have a model which I quite like. It's 35p per kilowatt. And that is for rapid charging at 50 kilowatts per hour. Now, it's worth noting that not everybody can take advantage because they are only DC compatible cars, not AC. But there are no subscription fees. You simply use your smart card, your phone, tap and go, Apple Pay, whatever it may be. And there are lots of different manufacturers. The problem is, in these early days of EV, is that they have limited compatibility. They don't always play with each other. It's a little bit like having a Nectar card and a BP rewards card and a Sparks card. You can't collect points in the same places. So the software platforms are very much different, and you need an account in order to use each one. But there's a company called ZapMap. So this is something that I'm sure those of you with EVs already will have. And if you do get an EV in the future, you'll definitely have this app on your phone. I think there's a few others as well, but essentially ZapMap is a map which is an app of a map which gives you the ability to see where the EV chargers are. You can go into real minute detail, so you can click on a specific location, see the type of charger that's there, see whether they're occupied or not, even see how much charge. So if somebody, for example, is already using at the Castle Mall car park a charger, you can actually see, when you look into it, how full their car is. You might look at it and go, wow, they've done 90% already, or they've only just started, I won't go there, I'll go somewhere else instead. So ZapMap is a really good map to use. So I'll just bring up a few pictures. That's an InstaVolt charger. You may have seen those around. There's the Polar BP Charge Master. They'll be on forecourts, There's the Pod Point is another company. They've partnered with VW and Tesco's. And then the one that probably most of you will see, probably the most, is on service stations, Ecotricity. That's their chargers. So there are 4 main EV charging speeds, okay, and they are slower rates of charge up to 3.6 kilowatts, and that's about 6 to 8 hours overnight. Then there's a faster rate of charge up to 22 kilowatts, which will recharge some cars in roughly 3 to 4 hours. And then there's rapid charge, which is a maximum up to 43 kilowatts. So that's all AC, and we'll come on to that in a second. And they can charge some cars in less than an hour. That's typical of the charge socket that you'll find on an EV for an AC car. And then there's DC, which is the rapid and going up to ultra rapid charging at 50 kilowatts, up to 350 kilowatts, which is an enormous amount. And they will do roughly 80% charge in about 30 minutes. So that's the rapid charging, which, you know, we'll come on to. Where are you going to need a rapid charger? Their plugs look something similar to that. A Porsche Taycan, for example, the new Porsche Taycan, at 350 kilowatts can do 80% of the range of the battery in about 15 minutes. So it's enormously powerful, enormously quick charging. So I said I'd talk a bit about AC versus DC. So in this country, we've got alternating current, and in order to take advantage of that with an electric vehicle, the cars will have an onboard charger. The problem with AC is that because of the onboard charger, it has size constraints. It's a slower charge. It takes a lot longer compared to DC. So a battery has a positive and a negative. And with DC, you can go straight into the battery, which basically means that all the power is much quicker, much faster, directly into the battery. So DC is obviously potentially a better way to go. And again, we'll see whether that's necessary moving forward. So something fun, to work out the cost of charging a car, you take the size of the battery and the cost of charge. Now, you'll obviously always have that scenario where we talk about, oh, how far your car goes, miles to the gallon. And obviously, from an electric perspective, you're thinking, well, how do I even work that out? So we'll take a car. This is the Nissan Leaf. It has a battery size of 40 kilowatts and a range of about 150 miles. Now, bear in mind that a car's range is subject to also how you drive it, whether it's cold, whether you've got the heater going, whether the windscreen wipers are going, whether the fog lights are on. All those things will have a slight drain on the battery. So you may find that actually you only get 120, 130 miles, depending on the conditions. So you take the charging cost, and we're going to use the Instavolt example. So that's nice and simple, 35p per kilowatt hour. And the battery size in this case, we've already said is 40 kilowatts. And then you just do the math, and that comes out at £14 to charge your car for your 150 miles, which works out at £10.71 per mile. So you can see that that's, you know, pretty good motoring, and that's at 35p per kilowatt, which in the grand scheme of things is quite expensive in comparison to what you'd pay if you were charging at home. So EV charging, it's not just the EV charging companies, when you pay your money to charge up, that are making money from you. There's a profit share, and we're getting to a stage now where the installers, the manufacturers, and even the car makers are all benefiting for every kilowatt that you put into your car. Local authorities are under great pressure to be doing more for EV, to provide EV charging, and so they're putting out tenders where a company will bid for the works, and they are responsible for every aspect of providing the charger, installing it, running it, maintenance, everything, and they're actually getting a kickback for it. So that's the way that some of them are looking at EV charging. It's worth saying that early adopters of EV have really benefited from being an early adopter, which doesn't happen all that often when you have early adopters to some things. But those days are fast coming to an end, because a lot of the time charging has been free in places. So businesses, certain places, garages, etc., have given free energy out for people to take up electric vehicles. And now they're getting to the point where they're needing to claw back their investment, and now you're being charged for it. Even Tesla, who prided themselves on the fact that in the beginning they handed out free energy. You bought a Tesla car and you could charge it for nothing at Tesla points all over the country. And now they only give you the first 1,000 miles, after which they actually have a charge of 20p per kilowatt hour. But it's more than just about cars. So electric vehicles, it's the electrification of all transport. So I've got some examples here. There's buses, there's taxis, motorbikes, delivery vehicles, Amazon, Amazon Prime, UPS, the police, even the fire brigade are all using electric vehicles. But the question is, how do you charge a large fleet of vehicles, such as buses and delivery vehicles? Because they're out during the day, and then at night, when they all need to be charged roughly at the same time, that must place enormous pressure on the network infrastructure.
When it comes to, say, fleet management, London buses, for example, or UPS, companies with massive fleets of vehicles who are out during the day delivering, therefore their only opportunity to charge those vehicles is at night.
Yes.
How will the network support the great demands of those charging points?
So there's two functions to the function of the energy system, right? There's the energy itself, and then there's the infrastructure to get it there. So overnight, energy price falls very, very low because nobody's really using energy, and we have base load energy running. So nuclear power stations don't really do turn up or turn down. They're either on or they're off. So actually the price of energy falls very cheaply overnight. So I mean, in real terms, I'll give you an example here. So I pay 5p a unit overnight for my energy, 5p per kilowatt hour. I pay 19p a kilowatt hour at peak time. So you can actually see there's a huge difference in price. So that's the energy component. So charging vehicles overnight is great, right? Because that's some way to put that low cost nuclear energy into. If you're actually thinking about the wires, when people make an application for grid connections today, we work on the basis, or most DNOs work on the basis of firm capacity. I have to have exactly the right capacity in the wire for what's going on the end. But what we've started to see the DNOs do very cleverly is actually have flexible capacity. So at the same time, when these factories and offices are closing up at night, there's actually spare capacity on the wires. So the DNOs are actually trying to be quite clever and sweating the asset, using the wires very effectively and giving out a bit more than they've actually got. It's at different times of the day. So there's actually lots of things going on to make the energy system more efficient, but also to make the energy infrastructure, the wires, more efficient.
Okay, so that was Graham Cooper, who's the EV project director at the National Grid, and he was very kind enough to give me some of his time, and we're going to visit Graham again a bit later on. So here we go. Here's a train, an electric train. Obviously, there's a lot of routes within the UK that are electrified, but there's a number of routes that aren't, and they're using diesel trains, which is obviously massively polluting. So to have a big, powerful battery on a train is obviously very, very friendly, environmentally friendly. But that's not all. Impressively, this is Ellen. Ellen is the world's first largest zero-emission electric ferry. It was an EU-funded project and started operation in August of last year, just from Denmark. It's 747 tons, can carry nearly 200 passengers and 35 vehicles, and is fitted with a massive battery which can charge in just 1 hour. So even something as large as that can be fully electric. And then there's even planes. Obviously, we're going to be there one day, and obviously, hopefully, the COVID situation at the moment means that hopefully airlines like EasyJet are around to benefit from that. I hope so. I've got flights with them next April. So how do you charge large fleets? And Graham's obviously touched on that, but there's another way. There's what we call BESS. So BESS is a battery energy storage system. And essentially what it does is that it takes charge from the network at specific times. So it does it when power is low, cost of power is low, and there's low demand on the network, and also when the network is very clean, when it's utilizing renewable energy such as wind and solar, etc. So it charges up these batteries, and obviously, as we talked about earlier on a DC perspective, it's then able to charge very, very fast the batteries that it's powering. So things like lorries, buses, and trains can all be charged, or a single vehicle. But what about us? What about smart charging for us? How do we utilize it? We can't have at home massive batteries that are being charged because they take up too much room, and the infrastructure might not be there for it. So similar to BESS is that we're being encouraged to use smart charging, which is essentially a conscious choice where we charge our cars and our EV vehicles at night when energy is cheapest. So it's low cost, low demand. Now you can override this, because if you suddenly need to make an emergency trip to go somewhere, then you'll have full power as and when you need it. But essentially, it's using the decision that you're going to charge your car overnight when energy is cheapest.
What is smart charging?
I can give you a real practical example. So I have a plug-in hybrid and a full electric vehicle. I have smart chargers on both. One of them is web-based, talks to the car across the internet, and the other one is a smart cable. But what they both do is they look at the price I pay for energy and how dirty the grid is. And so in both cases, they will charge my cars, but only when the grid is clean, so when wind is running and solar is running, but also when it's cheap. And generally what we find is the cheaper periods of the day is actually when the grid is under less stress. So actually you get pressure off the grid, cleaner charging, cheaper charging. Okay. And that actually makes the whole energy system a bit more sort of, I guess, more even, really. Yeah. Charging cars with clean energy actually helps you build more clean energy.
Okay, so the National Grid, Graham, they're behind smart charging. Right, I've brought this picture here. Simon, you can hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Right, have we had any questions about elephants?
No, well, I've had someone asking whether the electrification of a fleet of vehicles includes elephants. But,
well,
other than that, no.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'll mention the elephant. The reason there's been an elephant in the room, literally, this whole time, is simply because certainly when you read a lot of literature online, this constant conversation comes back all the time to, it's all very well saying that, you know, we can provide you energy as and when you need it, but can the infrastructure, can the cables in the ground, can the substations actually deal with the mass take-up of EV and the demand? So I put that question to UK Power Networks and Neil Madgwick, who joins us now.
In trying to meet the demand, what's more important to you guys, smarter charging or network reinforcement? Which do you think is going to have a greater effect moving forward?
So I think the answer is both are important, but absolutely, we've made a commitment and we think it's absolutely right that you should look at all the commercial and technical smart solutions before you reach for your spade and shovel to dig more holes in the ground and lay more cable. So we want to ensure that customers are utilizing flexibility, that they're thinking about when they want to charge and looking at the supplier options for charging off peak, for looking at things like timed connections, again, to only charge when they need to, before we suggest to them that they need to put new assets in the ground. So the answer is that smart can't fix everything, but we should look at all of the smart options first at a bespoke level with each customer before we suggest to them that they need to put more infrastructure in the ground.
Okay, so there you have it. They're quite happy with that. But the challenges of converting the nation to EV are really felt at every level. So the National Grid, the DNO, large fleet companies, both private and public, and local authorities. So I'm just going to touch on some of those. Let's look at the DNOs. So EV charging is going to have a significant effect on the network and its demands. UKPN have said that currently there are 72,000 electric vehicles and 1,800 charge points in the DNO region at the moment. But by 2028, there's going to be about 3.6 million electric vehicles. So obviously there's going to be this huge mass demand and mass take-up. Now, they said that currently on the LV network, it can support a feeder pillar connected to a charging station, charging up to 7 kilowatt, 22 kilowatt for up to 24 chargers. And there's a slow rate of charge and there's no issue with that. But it's worth noting that one rapid 50 kilowatt charger is the equivalent of a block of flats or a 6-story office block at the end of your road. And obviously the network infrastructure in that case, might not be capable of dealing with that. It's going to require network reinforcement of not just the substation, but the cables in the ground. And in some cases, it might not be possible. Local authorities, local authorities are dealing with EV as best they can. Now, charging stations are required not just by local residents, but by those visiting the boroughs and the regions as well. So it's not just the people that live there, but it's the people who are traveling to those areas. And different councils have very different ideas on EV charging and how they go about delivering them. Some are being very proactive, and some of them are actually thinking, do you know what, we're just going to leave that to the private sector to deliver. Applications for chargers are taking over a year to come to fruition, with another 6 months for them to actually get in the ground. And a lot of that's to do with the design and the location of the chargers, which is a real issue. Some places, pavements are too narrow for chargers, and councils have to look at building them out into the carriageway. So that's going to take away road space, parking areas. Kensington and Chelsea, for example, have a large conservation area which prevents such items as EV chargers on the side of the road. So what are they going to do? Council car parks are being used to install chargers. And I think there's really a ratio split of about 85% a standard 3 kilowatt to 25 kilowatt charge, which is on the slow side, versus the rapid chargers. So they're definitely looking to provide more for everybody rather than the few who want that speed. So it's really about topping up the charge rather than delivering it from zero. But many councils have to be seen to be doing something, and a lot of them are turning to streetlights as EV charging points. These are obviously slow rates of charge, 3 hours to do about 25 miles. So that's the sort of thing that you would charge up overnight. But when you are looking to do an application, you obviously talk to the DNO, and I spoke to Neil about that.
But can you talk to us a little bit about the process from your end? When you receive an application, what steps do you have to go through before you can actually say to somebody, yeah, that's fine, you can have that charger there?
Yeah, it's a good point, Greg. So I think what I would say is that the first thing that customers should do is think about our pre-application support. So for us, the formal application is probably halfway through the journey. So it's really important that customers make use of our free Ask the Expert service, our surgeries, our heat maps, to get as informed decision as they can before they actually put the formal application in. Once we receive the formal application, we take it at face value. So if a customer says they want X amount of power, in this case for EV chargers, in this particular location, we will then produce a quote that allows them to have that much power in that location. And as you rightly say, some of those applications could be for significant power and could require us to do a large amount of trenching across perhaps third-party land, which would involve us talking to third parties about legals. But equally, if it's something as simple as a street lighting charger connected to a lamp column in a highway, those jobs can be quoted and delivered within 4 to 6 weeks. So it really depends on what the customer's trying to do, how much power they need, where they need it, and the timescales that they're working to. So it really depends. But the really important thing is to talk to us early, understand and be really clear about what type of customers you're trying to give what service to, and then we can work together to get the most cost-effective solution.
Okay, so there's the message from UKPN is talk to us early, get involved, because it's not just as simple as I'd like a charger and it's there sort of within a couple of weeks. There's a big process to go through. EV charging has complications, but they can be overcome, and certainly by talking to UKPN in advance and the other DNOs, I'm sure they've all got departments that can help them talk you through your EV charging needs. So just a quick talk on funding. There are two different types of funding. There's CIF funding and OLEV funding. CIF was the Charging Infrastructure Investment Fund, which was basically to catalyse the rollout of EV charging, and was a joint venture between the government and private sector, both putting in £200 million each. And then there's OLEV funding, which is the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, and they offer grants, £500 for domestic properties, and up to £10,000 for larger businesses and local authority schemes. And that's why it's important to talk to the DNO, because there is limited money, and once you've got that money, you then need to decide where you want to put the charger. And if putting a charger down street A means that you can spend that £10,000 and get some chargers in there, that's great. But if it means that putting it where you'd really like it is going to involve a substation upgrade, which might cost £50,000, then obviously you're limited by what you can do.
With the financial impact that coronavirus is having on the government and the way that they are looking to bail the country out,
yes.
Do you see money being taken away from those green efforts in places? I mean, the different funding sources that people could rely upon, is that money going to be there moving forward?
Really good question, but it's also really difficult for me to answer because I'm not the government, and I think the government is still working this out on a daily basis. But let me highlight, a few things. Climate change hasn't gone away because of Corona. Once we've got over Corona, climate change, is still there. It's still going to be a challenge for us. The cost of climate change, the impact on our environment, we still have legally binding objectives, and again, set in law so that we can't just ignore them. So all of those things are in place, and we will need to still get to where we're going to get to. The one thing I do observe from government, though, is when government starts to look at an industry to bail out, do you, as a government, bail out the industry to get back to where you were, or do you bail them out and actually try and bail them out to get them to where you're trying to get to? So I almost think that, yes, we could be in a global recession, but if you're going to bail anything out, don't bail it out back to where you were. Be intelligent with it, bail it out to where we're going. So I would like to think that there's that level of thinking in government, and I sort of sense there is, but only time will tell.
Okay, so really the message there is really that we've made a commitment to EV, and nothing's really going to change that. We need to tackle our emissions, and the government's target of 2032, which has been brought forward, is very much still there. The agenda is still there, the funding is still there, and we need to grasp it with both hands. So is this the answer, really street-like charging, with a view that a lot of charging is actually just about topping up all the time, rather than needing to charge up from empty? And what about long journeys? What about motorways? How do we get up to Scotland, for example, to go and visit our granny? What do we do about that?
For things like motorway charging, the grid connections are very expensive, the chargers are expensive, but we all need confidence that we can go further than the range of the car. So in the budget in February, government announced £500 million to help that underlying infrastructure. So that's a sort of investment ahead of need, but that's to build confidence in a growing market. But as the market matures, what we should find is the normal commercial drivers should stimulate the upgrades in grid connection.
Okay.
Yeah, going back to your point on the motorway service stations, they tend to be fairly remote. Are those going to be powered off the HV network? Is that possible to get? And obviously, therefore, gives you the bigger charges.
Yeah, absolutely. So the government has a task force called Project Rapid, which all the DNOs and National Grid are involved in, looking at the power requirements to future-proof the motorway service stations out till 2050. And you're absolutely right; those are going to require 11 or 33 kV solutions from the HV or EHV network to give the power required to enable charging, not just of cars, but in the future for heavy goods vehicles as well. So there are an increasing number of HGVs which are electrified as well, and the MSAs, the motorway services, need to be able to cater for everybody who needs to charge en route.
Okay, so there's the message from the National Grid and the DNO that motorway services are going to have power. You're going to be able to charge there. It's going to be rapid charging, and so the idea of pulling in, having a coffee, plugging in for 20 minutes, giving you enough juice to be able to complete your journey isn't going to be an issue. So solutions, really, I'm going to just run through these quite quickly. Essentially, low-powered EV chargers have less of an impact, and I think certainly for the foreseeable, it's not about the DC chargers in public places that are enabling people to charge up, you know, their entire battery from zero. It's really just about keeping the cars ticking over when they're in the cinema, when they're doing their shopping. Being able to plug in just to keep your car ticking over is basically the way we're going to go. Optimized charging, smart charging has been a reoccurring theme from the DNO, from the National Grid, from everybody. It's not about suddenly digging up all the roads and cables and trying to improve everything. It's about saying, look, let's just be smart about our charging, and actually there's enough energy for everyone to go, for energy to go around for everybody. And we need to make better use of the power that's out there already. Graham mentioned it earlier. Basically, there are buildings there that have extra capacity which isn't being used, and we can utilize that power to power a substation, a charging station on the side of the road, for example, you know, with higher load, when that building is all locked up and everyone's gone home. Project Shift is something that I was going to get into, but essentially it's an opportunity for customers to do smart charging. It's a form of smart charging where they are actually allowing the DNO to take energy back out of their battery when they don't need it, i.e. at night, and use it on the grid. And they're effectively selling that power back to the grid. Now, typical smart charging, if you're just charging your car at home, you can be about £67 better off compared to a high rate of charge during the day. Vehicle to grid users, Project Shift, are getting, because they're selling their energy back to the grid, they're effectively being paid on an average of £378 per month, which comes off their household energy bill. So there's a massive amount of money there to be made. Unfortunately, the only car, certainly last year, as of November, that you could do that with was a Nissan Leaf. So, you know, it's sort of fairly limited, but that's going to improve. The DNOs can then use that energy on the network when it's required, and give it to high demand where it's required, yeah.
In the early days of the internet at home, we had dial-up. You all remember dial-up? It took forever to load anything, and it was very noisy. And effectively, today, you've got super fast broadband. And that's necessary for the media and the TV and everything else that we consume online. Today, we're in the early days of electric vehicles, and it's fine to have a 7 kilowatt or 3.2 kilowatt charger at home, you know, where it's going to take you something like 4, 5, 6 hours to charge up your car. But as technology moves on and cars become more efficient, better ranges, bigger batteries, etc., will we get to a point where a 3.6 kilowatt charger at home just isn't going to cut it? It's the equivalent of the dial-up from years ago, and we really need the equivalent of a 50 kilowatt charger at home.
This is me speaking, not necessarily UK Power Networks. This is my view on the world from what I've seen. At home, if you're lucky enough to live at home and can charge off street, i.e. you've got a driveway, I think a 7 kilowatt charger, not a 3.6, a 7 kilowatt charger will be more than adequate. If you think that the average driver actually only drives less than 40 miles a week, so whether, irrespective of whether the cars have bigger batteries, actually the mileage that we're doing isn't changing. So the ability to plug the car in and at some point in the week through smart charging at the cheapest time, which is likely to be overnight, for that car to be topped up to work in conjunction with your smart charger and your telemetry to understand when it needs to charge and how much it needs to charge, I think a 7 kilowatt charger is going to be more than adequate. Where it's going to be different, clearly, is for those who don't have access to off-street parking and need to charge somewhere else, and clearly those customers who are looking to charge en route. So the obvious example that we all talk about clearly is the motorway service station. So absolutely, you know, for a motorway service station, you don't want to hang around more than 20 minutes. So do I think the move to 150 kilowatt and 350 kilowatt high power chargers en route will become the norm? Absolutely. And we're already seeing that in the applications we're receiving. You know, with a 350 kilowatt charger, within 15 minutes, you can get 250 miles of range. So for an en route charging situation, that makes absolute sense. Or perhaps for a taxi on a taxi rank that needs to get a top up etc., etc., then absolutely, bigger the charger, the high-powered chargers will make sense. I think at home, if you have off-street parking, a 7 kilowatt charger in your house will be more than adequate.
Okay, so as I said, I don't think we need to go down the high-powered route just yet. Some final thoughts, really, just to finish off with. EV is happening, and we all need to get on board, because whether we like it or not, we are all going to be driving electric vehicles in the next, say, 20 years. And the recent COVID-19 events have really given us an insight into a cleaner, greener future. And I think that's made a lot of people think about electric vehicles. It's all about smart charging. It's all about being a bit clever about how we charge our cars. Range anxiety, it affects those who don't currently have an electric vehicle. I think we all think that, suddenly we're always worried about running out. But in actual fact, the average commute is only about 11 miles. And cars are not used to empty, but are constantly between 30 and 60%. So if you've got a car that does 150 miles of range, and you're only doing 11, 12, 15 miles on a commute, you can see that you can go pretty much all week without charging. And the equivalent is like your mobile phone. You don't recharge your mobile phone after every call, because you've got enough battery to last the day. And the day in an electric vehicle sense is the entire week. Typically, users only charge between 10 and 11 times a month, and only for 2 or 3 hours, just to top up their batteries all the time. So there we go. That's the end of my presentation. I'd like to put a big thanks out to Graham Cooper from the National Grid and Neil Madgwick of UK Power Networks. Really appreciated your time. There was a lot more to get into it. I could have done this for about 3 hours, but obviously we had to cut it just to half an hour, and I think we're a little bit over that. Simon, I'll go to you. Are there any questions, any burning questions that people want to ask?
Yeah, hi Greg. We've got a lot of questions actually. So I think from a time point of view, I'm going to just curate some of them, and also with the potential to not throw you too many curveballs. I'll caveat that by just saying that if you have asked a question that's fairly specific, what we'll do afterwards is get back to you directly and answer that question. So I've got a question from Steve asking, large numbers of cars are being charged at the same time. It must be an issue with park and ride sites, hundreds of cars being charged. Is this going to require a high level of power and therefore massive infrastructure? I think you touched on that in the presentation, but maybe go back to that.
Yeah, so one of the things that came out of the motorway services, park and ride sites are much like motorway services, is that they tend to be out of the cities, out on the edge of the sort of greenbelt land, if you like. And one of the things about the motorway services is that a lot of them were within 5 kilometers, it was, of the transmission network. So I don't think getting power, if more demand is needed to those sites, is going to be an issue. Yes, there's going to be wayleaves, there's going to be private landowners to get power across their land, but essentially those locations, because of where they are, that they're out of towns and cities, getting power to them shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, I've got a question from Michael. You mentioned the variety and the types of chargers and connections from different manufacturers. Is there a connection type that would cover most applications? Local authorities might be hesitant to install a charger that could be outdated in a few years, given the rate of development.
There's no doubt about it that compatibility is something that they're already cracking down on. It's a little bit like the whole sort of Betamax VHS thing from years ago. You were either one or the other, and ultimately VHS won out. And there will be a lead that will win out, so you'll have an AC lead and a DC lead. And it's fair to say that a number of the charging points will have both. But some of them are specific to certain cars. So different manufacturers were having different types of charging lead. And obviously that was going to cause an issue. But I don't know where we are exactly at the moment, but certainly in the future, there will be a much smaller choice here.
Sarah's asked, will the speed of charge affect the cost? So if you have I presume if you have a rapid charger, is that more expensive for your cost of charge?
It isn't. So Instavolt, for example, I use them as an example. They're 35p per kilowatt, and they will charge at 50 kilowatt up to 123 kilowatt. I think, interestingly, something I didn't mention earlier, but I thought was fascinating, is that you might get a scenario where certain people have paid extra to be sort of like a premium member of a charging company. And as a result, if there was a bank of, say, 6 chargers and there were 5 cars plugged in and they were all charging at a certain level, he could come along and plug his card in. And because it recognizes him as a premium customer, it actually increases the speed of his charging and drops the power of everybody else. And you wouldn't be very happy about that if you left your car thinking it was going to charge X amount and you came back and it wasn't where you thought it would be. So the speed isn't any different, but I'm not saying that it couldn't potentially be.
Okay, just like I said, there's lots of questions, but I think just finish off with a couple more. Got a question here. Does electric spell the death knell of the classic car? How sympathetic do you think governments are going to be to our motoring heritage with maybe electric battery and combustion engine?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I certainly hope not. As a part-time petrol head who enjoys classic cars with my friends, we certainly like to be able to get out and about every once in a while and enjoy the combustion engine. So yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, I knew you'd thank me for that question. I think the last question here is use of street lighting columns to mount low power charging. Peter here says most columns have been designed to be at the front of the footpath, back of the footpath, and this may mean they need to be moved to the front of the footpath. How is that being dealt with? Well, yes, I mean, I'm aware that that's happened in places. I think that there is an issue. There is a fundamental issue with street lighting. Is that if you took street lights which were roughly 30 meters apart, and you had a street that was so long, you could only get so many cars plugged into a street light. Obviously, one car at any one time. So you can have 30 cars in a street. And essentially, there's probably only 5 cars that could actually be plugged into a street light. And if that car's plugged in overnight, no one else can plug in. So there are limits to that. But as far as moving them from front of path to back of path, I believe the local authorities, when I challenged them on that question back in November, they believe that the liability is with the person whose lead it is, so the person who's plugging it in, and not with the local authority. So yeah, I'd be very careful. But yeah, it's an awkward one, having spent all that money moving them, to only have to move them back again.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, we've had a fantastic response on the questions from everyone, so thanks for that. I think maybe what we'll do is put a Q&A on our website to answer some of these questions, because they're quite detailed and need some specific answers. So yeah, have a couple of days, have a look at our website. We'll maybe send you a link, those that have registered for the webinar. We'll have some Q&As on there.
That just leads me to thank everybody for logging in and watching this webinar and the previous 2 that we've done with James and his Acceptable in the 80s presentation, and Simon and his 18th edition Warang Regs Whistle Stop Tour. We hope you've enjoyed them. We'll plan to do some more in the future. Not quite sure when, but probably in a couple of months or so. We do have another webinar on our EasyWeb, which will probably be more specific for clients. So we'll put some details out on that soon. But otherwise, just leaves me to say thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon. Stay safe.